just going to jump right in. We are going to be discussing the patriarchal covenants. Now, I've had the privilege of being able to teach this twice, both first at Sukkot and then at a women's retreat. Now, I've modified them both since then. Every time I teach this, I learn something new. I learn better ways to present the material, better ways so that you guys can see it. Because I see my ultimate job is to share it with you guys so you can see it. So the more I teach it, the better I think I learn as to what information goes really well together to present that idea. Now, if you are following along in the book, please just go to chapter 3, because that is where we will be focusing tonight. And the reason we're going to chapter 3, because remember, in our chronological studies, we are now on chapter 14. We are beginning chapter 14, which is the study of the testimony. Over the last month, 6 weeks, we have looked at the tabernacle of testimony and the ideas, the symbolism established within the structure of the tabernacle. Well, both the tabernacle of testimony as well as the prophetic law, the testimony, which we're going to be looking at this evening, all of these find their basis. They find their core foundation within the patriarchal covenants. And I would like to show you how this works and like to show you kind of the chronological progression. Typically, the modern idea of prophecy, because this is what this entire subject matter deals with, is prophecy. The typical relationship or the typical ideology that people have with prophets in the Tanakh or the Old Testament is that the Spirit of God comes upon them and they just mysteriously, miraculously have a vision. They begin to see some sort of truth that God's Spirit shows them, and they just begin to utter it out of the mouth. Well, I'm going to kind of challenge that. Not just kind of, I'm going to downright challenge that, because I think that that is an errant concept. I would compare Israel's prophets more to scholars than what I would to some mysterious, like Balaam. Remember, it says where Balaam was like he was in a trance and he prophesied. That is a different type of prophecy than what Israel's prophets used. And we're going to go through that tonight. Now, I think I posted not too long ago, please get your coffee, please get your hot cocoa. We are going to go over tonight. I really would like to cover the entire chapter 3, the idea of prophecy and the idea of truth that chapter 3 establishes in one class. So if you tire out tonight, it will be up on YouTube and you can come back another time and finish it up. But we are going to finish the material tonight. So I'm going to go ahead and go get chapter 3, and we are just going to start with the slideshow. Oh, Dave, I'm so glad you and Patty are here. Nice to see you, Kay. Glad you're here as well. All right, so we have a fun group tonight. So this is the fun part about the winter time, is that we get to enjoy more people because you really can't go anywhere. So all that sleet and snow, it allows for us to have more fun right here on YouTube. So I'm just going to start with the first one. And I wanted to start this with the question of, is prophecy important? Because you have different groups today. And if you hear me break, it's because I am drinking a lot of water. With it being drier, I do tend to dry out more quickly. So you have various groups today that make different claims. You know, some will say that the Torah is the only thing that's important. The law of YHWH is the only thing that's important. The prophets don't matter, or maybe they're errant. But so you have different groups that focus on different things. So I wanted to get the Tanakh's perspective, and I don't isolate the Torah from the prophets as far as legitimacy or validity. But I wanted to really focus on what Isaiah tells us about prophecy. And this is what Isaiah says. He says, "Have you not known? Have you not heard? Has it not been told to you from the beginning? Have you not understood from the foundations of the earth?" So this is kind of just a general question as to the idea that something has been told to us from the beginning, and it is important. And then for some reason, okay, here we go. Again, Isaiah says in Isaiah 48, I have declared the former things from the beginning, and they went out of my mouth, and I showed them. I did them suddenly, and they came to pass. Because I knew you were obstinate, and your neck is an iron sinew, and your brow brass. I have from the beginning declared to you it. Before it came to pass, I showed it to you. Lest you should say, my idol has done them, and my graven image and my molten image has commanded them. So what we have in Isaiah 48 is this idea that Jehovah himself has declared things. He has declared truth. He has declared things that are going to happen before they came to pass. He has told us what our future would be. And that actually is to Jehovah's glory, as well as it is a one attribute of his righteousness, as we will see. Oh, so glad you guys are here. Sue and Cindy. Oh my goodness, Dave, you guys look like you are freezing. Anyways, yeah, it is best to be inside tonight. So what we have, continuing in Isaiah 48, he continues and says, you have heard, see all this, and will not you declare it? I have shown you new things from this time, even hidden things that you did not know them. They are created now and not from the beginning, even before the day when you heard them, lest you should say, behold, I knew them. Now, I'm not going to get into the new things that are created. We're going to save that for another class, but let me just note here that some of the new things that are created are often created by the prophets themselves. Prophets do have the authority to augment Jehovah's previously written word. And the way they do this is by adding more detail within the structure that both the patriarchal covenants and the testimony define. So anyway, so and then this is the last verse. Yes, you heard not. Yes, you knew not. Yes, from that time that your ear was not open, for I knew that you would deal very treacherously and would be called a transgressor from the womb. So Isaiah is saying through Jehovah that he knew that Israel would be a transgressor from the beginning and that they did not know their future. In other words, it isn't Israel that is establishing her own future. It's not the people that are saying what their future will be. They don't even know. But it is Jehovah showing them and Jehovah declaring it from the beginning what the future would be, then sending his prophets to add more information and kind of fill in the blanks. Isaiah continues, this is now in verse 9, for my name's sake I will not defer my anger, and for my praise I will refrain for you, that I cut you not off. Behold, I have refined you, but not with silver. I have chosen you in the furnace of affliction. Now, tonight we're going to see the importance of this process of God refining you and choosing Israel in the furnace of affliction. For my own name's sake, even for my own sake, I will do it. For how should my name polluted, and my glory will I not give to the other? So the concept that you have within the idea of prophecy and Jehovah foretelling the future is that it will finally cause for Jehovah's glory not to be given to other deities, not to be given to other humanity or other causes, but rather it is a process, prophecy is whereby it sanctifies Jehovah among competing ideologies and among other gods, whether they be idols or even modern ideas of who God is today. Now, Isaiah 44, this is just the last part of it. This is the last text we're going to look at, verses 14 through 16. All you assemble yourselves and hear, which among you have declared these things? Jehovah has loved him. He will do his pleasure on Babylon, and his arm will be on the Chaldeans. Even I have spoken. Yes, I have called him, I have brought him, and he shall make his way prosperous. Come you near, hear you this. I have not spoken in secret from the beginning. From the time that it was, there I am, and now Adonai Jehovah and his spirit has sent me. So again, you have this idea that God did not tell Israel in secret what their future would be. He prophesied and declared Israel's future from the beginning, whether it was what Babylon would do to Israel or what he would later do to Babylon. All of these things YHWH declared from the beginning to Israel. So the next question becomes, how did God tell Israel? Well, you have two categories of sources for by which God told Israel. The first of them is going to be the patriarchal covenants. The second is going to be that what is known as the testimony. And we will get into the testimony in just a minute. I'm just laying that foundation out there. Isaiah continues to reiterate the important things, or the importance of God foretelling Israel's future, God's ability as a fortune teller. In Isaiah 46, verses 9 and 10, he says, "Remember the former things of old, for I am God, and there is none else. I am God, and there is none like me. Declaring the end from the beginning, and ancient times the things that are not yet done, saying, my counsel shall stand, and I will do my pleasure. Who has declared from the beginning that we may know, and before time that we may say he is righteous? Yes, there is none that shows. Yes, there is none that declares. Yes, there is none that hears your words." So here you have the idea that YHWH's ability to declare the beginning from the end, to foretell the future and to get it correctly, is one attribute of YHWH's righteousness. It is one of the things that makes him God. So we've established that prophecy is indeed important, at least within the context of Isaiah. We also find something else that Isaiah says. And you guys know how much I love quoting this text. Isaiah says, "Bind up the testimony, seal the law among my disciples." Now, notice the separation of these two things. To the law and to the testimony, they speak not according to this word, it is because there is no light in them. You know, when a prophet prophesied, it wasn't as though Israel had no measure or standard by which to judge the accuracy of what he said. The testimony was there for Israel to see if what that prophet said was true and correct, or if he lied. So what is the testimony? The testimony is specifically the curses found within the law. Now, not just all the curses, it's specifically part of the Aduth, which would have been Leviticus 26 for the Sinai covenant, and then Deuteronomy 28 through Deuteronomy 30 in the Moabic covenant that would have occurred in the plains of Moab right before Israel entered the promised land. So both the law of Moses as well as the testimony within the law of Moses are very important for establishing truth and for establishing prophecy. Now, the testimony, as we will see over the upcoming weeks, establishes prophecy in a very chronological order, something where if a prophet looks to the testimony, he is not going to get that chronology wrong. He is going to follow that chronology. And we will see that over the next few weeks and months as we study the testimony. So this was, when I read those texts in Isaiah, one of the first questions that I had was, what has YHWH declared from the beginning? And we are going to begin with the concept of ancient covenants. Now, we did study this in chapter 3. This would have been well over a year ago. I want to review some of the ideas first of all, but what we're really going to get into are the specific portions of each covenant that have bearing on prophecy. And we're going to have some really surprising ideas that are right before us in plain sight within these covenants that I think we've just kind of glossed over. We really haven't seen how important they are in the context of prophecy. So remember that all covenants had a preamble, historical prologue. This just kind of gives you the structure of what most ancient covenants had. What we are going to be focusing on a lot are not only the stipulations, but also the promises for compliance, as well as the penalty for breach. That penalty for breach is really where you find a lot of chronology, and it's a chronology, as we will see, Israel's prophets uphold. The first covenant that we're going to look at is going to be the Noahic covenant. You know, a lot of promises are given in this covenant. You know, the stipulation is do not eat the blood of animals, do not murder mankind, and a precept for judgment is established that life should go for life. These are really key concepts that you see reiterated over and over again in the Torah. But what we're going to be focusing tonight is this idea of death by animals and the idea of death by fellow man. And I make the claim here, and we're going to look at this tonight, that the God's statement that there would be death by animals indicates national war, like a foreign invading army. And that death by fellow man indicates a civil war, civil strife that will occur. Now, I'm going to actually read this. Let me look this up real quick here. And this is what the stipulation says. This is going to be Genesis 9, verse 4. It says, "But the flesh with the life thereof, which is the blood, you shall not eat. And surely your blood of your lives will I require at the hand of every beast, will I require it at the hand of man, and at the hand of every man's brother will I require the life of man. For whosoever sheds man's blood, by that man, or by man shall his blood be shed. For in the image of Yah is he man made." So there's this idea that this idea of eye for an eye, especially where murder is concerned, that requiring retribution or requiring judgment and justice for this is it's demanded because we are made in God's image, and that it is such an honorable thing to have that it must be upheld as sacred. And when you do not turn your eye from beholding the wrong that is done, when you take it into consideration and you render just judgment, it maintains the sanctity of human life rather than just turning your head to the side and, you know, just allowing people to murder each other without consequence. It really keeps the humanity as well as the honor and dignity with which we were created. So what we're going to look at now is this idea, prophetic idea of death by animals, because it says, I will require it at the hand of, let's see, you shall surely your lives and your blood at the hand of beast will I require it. So the prophets really pick up on this idea of God requiring humanity's death by beasts. And this is what the prophets say. Actually, I forgot about this one slide. Let's go through this. One judgment evolves into the other. The curse or consequence. The first one is death by animals, national war. The second one is going to be death by fellow man, civil war. The judgment by beast evolves into the judgment by fellow man. So the national judgment falls into civil war and a conflation of both. And we're going to see this as we go through these prophecies. So the judgment by beasts. This is one prophecy. Woe to you that desire the day of YHWH. To what end is it for you? For the day of YHWH is darkness and not light. As if a man did flee from a lion, and a bear met him, or went into the house and leaned on his hand, and a serpent bit him. Shall not the day of YHWH is darkness? I think it shall. Shall not the day of YHWH be darkness and not light, even very dark, and no brightness is in it? So when you study prophecy, there is a chronological development of ideas. Every prophet begins with the patriarchal covenants, with the law of Moses and the testimony. From there, he's going to build on the Psalms, and it's not just the Psalms within the book of David. It's going to be the Psalms of Moses, the Psalms of Deborah, and then the Psalms of David. And then from there, he's going to go to Micah and Amos and Isaiah, and Hosea, because those are the first prophets that prophesy. And because the prophets are scholars, they're going to always build on their predecessors' work. Notice I have highlighted this in green, as if a man did flee from a lion and a bear met him. What Amos is describing here is a method of judgment by beasts. And it's this idea that one judgment evolves into another judgment. You know, you escape from a lion and then a bear meets you. And then you escape from a bear and a serpent meets you. So all what these beasts have in common, each of these beasts have some sort of power. They have some sort of ability by which they can kill humanity. Amos's father, let me make sure I haven't skipped anything. I haven't. Okay, so Amos's father lived right around 800 BCE. What you find is that Hosea, Micah, and Amos are the first books to be written before the sun set on the prophets. And we're going to get into this idea of the sun setting on the prophets in probably about 2 or 3 classes from now. And it builds on a curse within Deuteronomy 28, something that Isaiah really fills in a lot more detail. But when you're trying to understand prophecy, you have to realize that Amos didn't build off of the words of Jeremiah or Isaiah, rather it's the other way around. Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, they all build off the words of Hosea, Micah, and Amos because they lived before them. And again, prophets use scholarship, building and working on the precedent and the words set by their predecessors. Hosea continues this idea of judgment by beasts that is established in the Noahic covenant. Hosea says, "For I will be unto Ephraim as a lion, and as a young lion in the house of Judah. Even I will tear and go away. I will take away, and none shall rescue." Few verses later, "I will meet them as a bear that is bereaved of her whelps, and will rend the caul of the heart, and I will there devour them like a lion. The wild beast shall tear them." So again, you have this idea of this fulfillment of the Noahic covenant, where man is being torn apart by a wild beast. Now, what is I guess symbolic in this, or is not so literal, is the fact that God is not literally saying that, you know, a physical bear or like a grizzly bear or something like that will attack them, but rather he uses beasts such as lions and tigers and bears and serpents to represent foreign invading armies. So remember, foreign aggression, foreign invasion is going to be the first part of this judgment that occurred. So chronologically speaking, a national judgment is going to take place before the second judgment, which is a judgment by civil war. So Jeremiah also builds on this. He says, "Behold, he shall come up like a lion from the swelling of Jordan against the habitation of the strong, but I will suddenly make him run away from her. And who is a chosen man that I may appoint over her? For who is like me? And who will appoint me the time? And who is that shepherd that will stand before me?" So here again, you have this idea of Yahweh raising up a wild beast. Again, in verse 22, Isaiah says, "Behold, he shall come up and fly as the eagle, and spread his wings over Bozrah. And in that day shall the heart of the mighty man of Edom be as the heart of a woman in pain." So in other words, Edom, for all of its threatening and all of its glory, will be turned into something that is very weak and something that cries out due to the pain that they are in. But the concept here in this wild beast is this idea of power, the strength, the power and the strength of this beast to deprive. Now it's interesting that right at the same time, you know, it's very interesting that we do not have prophecies in the manner of Ezekiel and Daniel before their lifetimes, because Ezekiel and Daniel actually lived during this judgment era. Remember, God had sent the beast of Assyria. He had sent the beast of Babylon. They had taken Israel. They had deported them into foreign lands. And it's only at this point in time where these beasts become very descriptive in the visions that both Ezekiel and Daniel see. And I'm just going to read this real quick. I am not reading the whole chapter. I think these verses really give you kind of the context and the idea of these wild beasts. And this really would have been right around 500 BCE all the way to about 415 BCE. It's kind of the timing and the setting of these prophecies. So Ezekiel says, also out of the midst thereof came the likeness of 4 living creatures, and this was the appearance. They had an appearance of man. As for the likeness of their faces, they 4 had the face of man, and the face of a lion on the right side, and they 4 had the face of an ox on the left side, and they also had the face of an eagle. So notice that with each of these, there's a human element, but then there's some sort of attribute of a lion, an ox, and an eagle, something that exhibited strength and power of each creature. So if these are foreign invading armies, Ezekiel is explaining what is going to occur very, very quickly in world history. You know, not sometime way off in the future, but sometime when the Noahic covenant actually places these prophecies, as we will see as we continue this study. So the beasts in Daniel are very similar. It says, and 4 beasts came up from the sea, diverse from one another. The first was like a lion, and he had eagle's wings. I beheld till the wings thereof were plucked, and it was lifted up from the earth, and made man stand upon the feet as a man, and a man's heart was given to it. So again, you have this idea of a human attribute with the power and the strength of a lion and an eagle, again with this idea of judgment. If you read through Daniel 7, you do find that there is this concept of judgment and of attacking and invasion that each of these beasts do where another nation is concerned. So that really kind of concludes the idea of beast. So now we're going to look at this idea of death by fellow man. And this is the second attribute. Now, before we look at this, let me just say that and I didn't put this on here because we're going to look at it more when we look at the combined testimonial laws of Leviticus 26 and Deuteronomy 28. But both of those incorporate the judgment of Numbers 33, verses 50 through 54. And what you find that the judgment of wild beasts fulfilled was the judgment in 54, where Yahweh says, if you will not drive out, dispossess, and dwell in the land, as I've commanded you, I will do all these things to you. So really it is fulfilling that Numbers effacement judgment that the judgment by wild beasts fulfills where Israel's history is concerned. Now, this death by fellow man is a second judgment. And we're going to see when and where this plays out as we go along. So this is how, remember, Zechariah looks to the testimony. He looks to the law of Moses when forming his prophecies. And this is what Zechariah prophesies when he looks to the testimony. It says, and it shall come to pass in that day that a great tumult from Yahweh shall be among them, and they shall lay hold every one on the hand of his neighbor, and his hand shall rise up against that of his neighbor. So again, this is almost straight out of the Noahic covenant, which said, at the hand of man I will require every man's brother will I require the life of man. So again, it's this idea of civil war and civil strife. Haggai 2:22 continues to build on this idea of civil war during the day of Yahweh. I will overthrow the throne of kingdoms, and I will destroy the strength of their kingdoms of the heathen, and I will overthrow the chariots and those that ride in them, and the horse and their riders shall come down, everyone by the sword of his brother. Again, where is this concept established? The only place this concept is established is within the Noahic covenant in Genesis 9. Isaiah continues to build on this idea. For wickedness burns as a fire, it shall devour the briars and the thorns, and kindle in the thickets of the forest, and they shall mount up like the lifting up of smoke. Though the wrath of YHWH of hosts is the land darkened, and the people shall be as fuel of the fire, no man shall spare his brother. So a couple interesting things. Notice that what is it that the fire devours? Well, in verse 18, we're told that it devours briars and thorns. When you do a word study on briars and thorns in the Tanakh, you discover that those are always symbolic of the wicked. So who's going to fuel this fire? You find that it's the people. The people of Israel are fuel of this fire. That is what's going to be burnt. And then how is it going to be burnt? Well, it's going to be, they are going to be burnt by every man lifting his hand against his brother. So it's going to be a time of national judgment and of civil war. Now, the Noahic covenant establishes world history, and this is what we or what we have looked at thus far. Now, aside from the Noahic covenant, Noah does establish world history by establishing prophecy. And he does this based on the actions of his children. So Noah didn't just go out there and arbitrarily do this. Rather, he did this as a response to something that either Ham or Canaan had done to him, something that was very not just disrespectful, but an act of rebellion in some way. And what Noah does is he takes a blessing from Shem and he gives it to Canaan. So if each of Noah's sons have their own innate blessing, if he takes a blessing from Ham and he gives it to Shem, Shem now has a double blessing. And God specifically says that Canaan will be Shem's servant. So I'm not going to read through this. I think we're all pretty comfortable and aware of this text. So we're just going to move on to the next slide here. The important thing is that Canaan loses his birthright, which was a land birthright, and now Shem has a double birthright. And I'm not going to go through every portion of these tables. If you find it difficult to read on your screen, we are just going through these in chronological order. You'll find this chart on page 82. But what we're going to focus on is this idea that Shem's birthright, that of being a great nation, and Abraham being sent to the land that I will show you, fulfills Noah's prophecy of this land, the land of Canaan, that is now being given to Abraham and his descendants. So this opens up the question, why Abraham? What you find is that Abraham was Shem's firstborn grandson. If you follow the patriarchal narrative, it charts all the firstborn children of Shem. Abraham is listed, and he would have been an heir to Shem. As a firstborn, he would have been a prince. Remember, within the book of Genesis, it refers to Abraham being a prince. Well, he actually was. As a firstborn of the children of the earth, Abraham would have been a prince and an heir to Shem and an heir to that birthright. As far back as we go in Egyptian history and ancient Egyptian history, that stretch of land from Euphrates to the Nile, or at least to the Sinai Peninsula, that parcel of land has actually been called Canaan by the Egyptians in very early history. So you have a lot of ancient history there that really correlates with the biblical record. So Abraham also inherits Shem's blessing, which is material blessings and leadership of the nations. Now, we're not going to get into that tonight, but it's very important to see the importance of land within prophecy, and also the promise that God establishes that Abraham and his descendants will own, they will possess, and they will rule over this particular tract of land. So the land of Israel becomes pivotal for Yahweh fulfilling Noah's words and for sanctifying his own righteousness. You know, if God cannot make Israel to live on the land, if he cannot occasion Israel dwelling safely on that land, then it impedes the Jehovah's righteousness, because he has not fulfilled his promises. But at the same time, the conundrum in this is that God just can't arbitrarily give it to Israel if they're not walking righteously before him. So it is God's job then to bring Israel to a place where they are willing to walk in a way that is right in his sight, so he can give them and make them to dwell on the land and to prosper. So now we're going to look at the Promised Land Covenant. And this, if you are following along in the book, this is going to be right on pages 83 and 84. Again, we're not going to go through every aspect of it. What we are going to focus on is this idea of a hidden judgment. When you look at Genesis 15, and this is right around verses 13 through 17, God issues a prophecy within this covenant to Noah. I'm sorry, with this covenant to Abraham, telling him that his children will go to a strange land, that they will be oppressed, but that in the fourth generation they will come out, and that they will return to the land of Canaan. So, but what this also, this prophecy establishes that the land wherein they dwell, the land of their captivity, God is going to judge that land, and his children will come out with great substance. So this is a hidden judgment prophecy within this. You know, we think we're talking about promises for Abraham, promises that are central to the land of Israel, but within this, there's a judgment for Egypt, a judgment and a spoiling of Egypt within a prophecy within a covenant. This is very unusual type of construct to have for an ancient covenant or an ancient treaty. So again, this becomes something that other prophets build on. They become an idea that we will see is developed within other covenants as well as within the words of the prophets. The oath of this one is Shem's birthright, to give Abraham the seed, or Abraham's children, the promised land. And this is defined from the Euphrates to the Pelusic branch of the Nile. So again, this establishes ideas that we will see are prophetic simply because Abraham's children did not come in and maintain the land during the eras of Joshua and David and all of that, simply because they were never obedient, which we're going to see as a key element for Israel's right and Israel's ability to possess the land. Now, the next one is the circumcision parity covenant. I'm not going to spend too much time on this, just to say that God places an injunction on himself, that injunction being that he can never reject Abraham's seed. So it really doesn't matter what judgment occurs in the Noahic covenant for Israel. It doesn't matter what Israel ultimately does. God can never reject Abraham's seed from not inheriting the promises that have been laid before Abraham and promised to Abraham for any reason. Rather, Yahweh has to wait until they come to a point where they are willing to return to him and they are willing to be obedient to him. Now, circumcision itself was the cutting away of the flesh of the foreskin on the male penis on the 8th day. But you also find that there is a spiritual concept that the prophets pick up on within this. Oh, hold on, I'm getting ahead of myself. I forgot that I broke this in two because it wouldn't all fit on one slide. So let's do this before we go into the prophetic significance. You find that the penalty or the breach of curse with the circumcision covenant is that if Abraham's children, if the children even of David or the children of Solomon or the children of Joshua, if they are not circumcised, Yahweh will not recognize them as Abraham's legitimate heirs. So circumcision is a very important qualification for inheriting the patriarchal blessings, access to the promised land, the right to rule over nations, the ability for blessing, all of that is tied to circumcision. So why is circumcision so important? Well, you find that oftentimes God uses a very physical act, but within that physical act that has it has implications and medical implications as far as health, spiritual implications as far as obedience, but you also find that it has very symbolic implications that the prophets build on. So in Deuteronomy, and this, as we will see, is part of the testimonial law that has yet to be fulfilled, actually. But this is the spiritual essence of this command. And this is what Deuteronomy 30 verse 6 states. It says, and Yahweh your God will circumcise your heart and the heart of your children to love Yahweh your God with all your heart, with all your soul, that you may live. And Yahweh your God will put all these curses on your enemies and on them that hate you, which persecuted you. And you shall return to the voice of Yahweh and obey, you shall return and obey the voice of Yahweh and do all his commandments, which I commanded you this day. So something very interesting to notice here is that the circumcision of the heart results in Israel returning and obey everything God had commanded on the plains of Moab. So a real circumcision of the heart is going to have some tangible qualification. It's not just going to be all words. It's not going to be just all feelings and emotions. There are going to be some very real attributes and tangible evidences that the heart has been circumcised. Now, Ezekiel also builds on this idea. And this is what Ezekiel says regarding the circumcision of the heart. He says, a new heart also will I give to you, and a new spirit will I put within you. And I will take away the stony heart out of your flesh, and I will give you a heart of flesh. And I will put my spirit within you and cause you to walk in my statutes. Yea, you shall keep my judgments and do them. So again, this idea of a new heart, of a new spirit, of us being circumcised to Yahweh, what is the result of that? Well, we walk in Yahweh's statutes. We will keep his judgments and do them. So notice there's a correlation to the law of Moses, the mishpat, as well as the chalk. All of these are specific divisions of law code within the law of Moses. So if we have this new heart, if we have this new spirit, the tangible evidence of that is our obedience. Now, as far as a national level, we're going to see that this is still a prophecy that is future for our time today. It is a prophecy that we have access to, something each and every one of us can do. It is just simply not fulfilled on a national level yet, as we will see in the upcoming weeks. Now, this one really kind of delves back into the Noahic covenant and this idea of a judgment day. This is going to be the burnt offering covenant that God made with Abraham. And I'm just going to highlight a couple of points here. The stipulation stated that Yahweh stated that the sacrifice would occur at Mount Moriah. The oath, it sealed Abraham's self-imprecating sacrifice by his only son. And let me just reiterate again the idea of a self-imprecating sacrifice. A self-imprecating sacrifice means that you bind yourself and your descendants to some promise that you make on their behalf. You promise to do something, and if you fail, then you are willingly say that you will your life will go for life as retribution. So often this would occur by a person slitting an animal's throat, taking an oath of fidelity, an oath of allegiance over that, and then saying that, you know, if I don't fulfill this, then may what happened to this animal occur to me and my children, basically for breach of pact. So this is kind of the idea that we have within this covenant. Now, this burnt offering covenant is very interesting, because what is it that Abraham is doing? Abraham is offering his only son. He's offering his firstborn son, Isaac, as a sacrifice for Yahweh. Really, he's offering Isaac as a burnt offering, a whole burnt offering. So now this symbolism becomes very important when we look at the tabernacle of testimony and we ask, what do these sacrifices within Leviticus, what do they represent? We find that this idea that is established within the patriarchal covenant is again an idea that not only do a lot of the statutes or the chak within the law of Moses build up on this concept, but you also again find that the prophets build on this concept. So Genesis 9, again, remember Noah, Yahweh has stated to Noah that he would require man's blood by the hand of every beast and every man's brother. So it's really in this concept of every man's brother that you find this idea of this horrific Holocaust, this sacrifice of a whole burnt offering. So the parameters of the burnt offering covenant in Genesis 23, I think, let's see, I think it isn't it 23. Let me verify here real quick. I'm sorry, Genesis 22. The parameters of Genesis 22 establishes several things. Number one, it establishes the place where Jehovah's sacrifice will take place. For those of you who are familiar with this, Mount Moriah was later renamed Jerusalem. So we know that the place for God's sacrifice will occur in Jerusalem. It is sealed by Abraham's self-imprecating sacrifice of his only son, or his firstborn son. And his self-imprecating sacrifice is a sacrifice for Abraham's children's breach of contract. So you find that if Abraham's children breach their contract with Yahovah, then their life is going to be given as an example. God is going to really make an example of them for future generations and really for the world to take note of. Now, in Exodus 4:22, God states that Israel is his son, even his firstborn. So when we ask, what is it that this burnt offering represents? Well, I think Israel plays a very important part of this as Jehovah's firstborn son. Now, let's look at the Tabernacle of Testimony regarding the whole burnt offering. You really find a lot of ideas and concepts established within the Tabernacle of Testimony. Ideas, remember Psalms 119 verse 55 states that the statutes, the Chag, had been the core concepts or the core parts of the songs that David had written within the book of Psalms. David says, behold, your statutes have been my songs in the house of my pilgrimage. So this really is important when we want to understand the Psalms, when we want to understand a lot of what Isaiah has written or Zechariah. You really have to look to the concepts embedded within the statutes of the law. And this is what Leviticus states. It says, now this is that which you shall offer on the altar, 2 lambs of the first year, day by day, continually. The one lamb you shall offer in the morning, and the other you shall offer at evening. And with the one lamb, a 10th deal of flour mingled with the 4th part of a hin of beaten oil, and the 4th part of a hin of wine for a drink offering. Now, I've highlighted drink offering. We're not going to get into it tonight, but it's very important that wine is associated with this burnt offering. It's kind of an interesting concept. And continuing, says, and the other lamb you shall offer at evening, and so shall you do according to the meat offering thereof in the morning, and according to the drink offering of it, for a sweet savor, an offering made by fire to Yahovah. This shall be a continual burnt offering through your ages, through your generations, at the door of the tabernacle of the congregation before Yahovah, there where I will meet with you and speak there to you. And there I will meet with the children of Israel, and the tabernacle shall be sanctified by my glory. Now, let me just point out a couple things. Number one is a continual burnt offering. It is at the door of the tabernacle of the congregation before Yahweh. And when Yahweh says, I will meet you there, remember what Hosea says that we saw previously? He says, I will meet you as a lion. This was on Mount Zion that this prophecy is really aimed. The tabernacle resided in Jerusalem. And it is really in God fulfilling of his own word, of his own prophecies, that sanctifies his name. So God, basically making good on his promises sanctifies Jehovah, his name as well as his glory, his reputation. Jerusalem is Mount Moriah. These are some of the prophecies that Jeremiah issues. He says, but if you will not listen to me and hallow the Sabbath day and will not bear a burden, even entering in the gates of Jerusalem on the Sabbath day, then I will kindle a fire in the gates of it, and it shall devour the palaces of Jerusalem, and it shall not be quenched. Remember, the idea of the continual burnt offering was this idea that it's never quenched because it's repetitive. It just continues on and on and on, because one lamb is burned in the morning, another in the evening. So it is continual. You also find that this idea of this continual burnt offering is really what marks Jerusalem's slaughter. It really begins this concept of the day of Yahweh. And this is what Isaiah says. For it is the day of Yahweh's vengeance, and the year of recompense for the controversy of Zion. And the streams of it shall be turned to pitch, and the dust of it to brimstone, and the land of it shall become burning pitch. It shall not be quenched night or day. The smoke of it shall go up forever. From generation to generation it shall lie waste. None shall pass through of it forever. So you have this idea of this continual burnt offering during the day of Yahweh that is not quenched. It seems like, every time one Holocaust or one people is slaughtered and the flames die down, more people are thrown into this fire, and there's more Holocaust, there's more national invasion, there are more civil wars. So it's really a time of upheaval for Israel and possibly the world, where you just have a very unstable social political structure at this point in time in world history. Isaiah says, behold, I have refined you, but not with silver. I have chosen you in the furnace of affliction. Awake, awake, stand up, O Jerusalem, which has drunk at the hand of Yahweh, the cup of his fury. You have drunken the dregs of the cup of trembling and wrung them out. Therefore now hear you this, afflicted and drunken, but not with wine. Again, is this idea that, a furnace is something that burns away the dross. It burns away and it leaves something that is pure and something that is real. Zephaniah builds on this concept again of Yahweh's sacrifice within the day of Yahweh. Fear you before Yahweh, for the day of Yahweh is near. For Yahweh has prepared his sacrifice and sanctifies his guests. And it shall come to pass in the day of Yahweh's sacrifice that I will take vengeance on the princes and on the king's house and all that wear strange apparel. That's a reference to the priestly garments. It says, and I will openly take vengeance on the porches in that day, on those that fill the house of Yahweh their God with ungodliness and deceit. So again, what is it that we see a correlation of? We see this idea of this whole burnt offering that is being prepared for Yahweh, just the same as Abraham did in Genesis 22. So when we look at the patriarchal covenants, they really do establish a whole lot more in their symbolism than what is actually spoken. When you look at, you can think of them as parables, especially Genesis 22 is very much a parable of God's sacrifice of his firstborn son Israel for their own sins. He never sacrifices anyone because they are innocent. He only sacrifices them because they entered into a self-imprecating oath and they rebelled against it, so they're guilty. And it is actually to God's glory to hold them accountable. And why? Why is this important? Well, we find that, I don't have it here, we find that God holding Israel accountable refines them. It changes them from a wayward and rebellious people into a people that are finally willing to obey, a people that have his spirit. So these are the concepts that are established so far in the day of YHWH, but there's another idea embedded within the patriarchal covenants as well. And this is the diaspora covenant. And in the diaspora covenant, you find that God, this is, historically speaking, Jacob was about to leave the land of Canaan to go to Padan Haran, to Laban's house, to find a wife for himself. He had just usurped his brother's blessing. That would have been his brother's right to rule over his mother's sons, his brother's right to rule over other nations for his descendants. These promises, whether we look at the Promised Land Covenant, whether we look at the blessing and in Genesis 28 for Jacob to rule over other nations, none of these promises are fulfilled within the lifetime of Abraham or within the lifetime of Jacob. These are prophecies. I mean, can you imagine a prophecy being your inheritance, and something that is prophesied for your children being that gift and that treasure that they inherit? That is what Jacob's children had. So Jacob had usurped the blessing, and he's leaving the promised land, and he goes to sleep at Bethel, and YHWH appears to Jacob at Bethel, and he confirms, even though Jacob had received the birthright and the blessing deceitfully, God still confirms it with him. He acknowledges his legal right, but he places an injunction on Jacob's children. So before they become a blessing to all the peoples of the earth, which was the very first promise within the Promised Land Covenant, before that happens, there's an injunction that is placed. And the injunction is this: the children of Jacob will be scattered to the east, the north, the south, and across the face of the earth. So we have this idea of diaspora established very early on in Genesis within the patriarchal covenants. And for those of you who are familiar with this, you know that the patriarchs prophesy no less than almost, I think it is about 60 times regarding the diaspora, the spreading and scattering into all nations of the earth, and then the latter day redemption back to the land. Those are two concepts that you find are very, very strong within the Tanakh. Well, and within the law of Moses, because the law of Moses also addresses this, as we will see in upcoming classes. You also find within this covenant that Jacob does something very specific. Jacob anoints the pillar with oil. And this idea of anointing with oil usually symbolizes the outpouring of YHWH's spirit. So within this idea of diaspora, we have this idea of an outpouring of YHWH's spirit that is associated with it. We're not going to get into that tonight, but I'm just going to mention that now. We will discuss that in future classes. Now, the testimony. This is going to be the testimony of Leviticus 26. And we're going to see how the testimony incorporates Genesis 28 of this idea of diaspora within the national covenant made between God and Israel at Mount Sinai. This is what God says. He says, "And I will scatter you among the heathen, and I will draw out a sword after you." So first of all, notice the chronology that God establishes. He first scatters them among the heathen. After they're scattered among the heathen, he draws a sword after them. So that's a very important chronology to remember as we discuss the day of YHWH in future studies. It says, "And your land shall be desolate, and your cities waste, And yet for all that, when they are in the land of their enemies, I will not cast them away, neither will I abhor them, to destroy them utterly and to break my covenant with them, for I am Yahweh your God. But I will for their sakes remember the covenant of their ancestors, whom I brought forth out of the land of Egypt in the sight of the heathen, that I may be their God. I am Yahweh. Remember the injunction within the circumcision covenant that we just read a few slides ago. Remember that the injunction that Yahweh placed upon himself forbid him to ever reject the seed of Abraham. God places this injunction where he is never allowed to break his covenant with them. The moment Israel comes into a state of obedience, the moment she listens and she obeys the statutes, the judgments, the commandments, the moment she does that, God is bound by law. He is bound by the strength of his own word and his own promises that he then has to make good on the promises to Israel that he had given to their ancestors. Deuteronomy also upholds the idea of diaspora. I did not put Deuteronomy in here. I'm sorry, guys. I thought I put Deuteronomy in here as well. I guess what we will do for Deuteronomy is we will look at that as we study the testimony and flesh it out verse by verse in the upcoming weeks. The prevailing covenant, the key ideas of the prevailing covenant is that Israel becomes as a prince prevailing with both God and men. God gives Jacob an extra blessing, and it is really through wrestling with God that Israel prevails. So what you have is that while Israel is in this diaspora, you find that she comes to a place where she wrestles with God to receive her inheritance, and that she finally does prevail with God and with men through obedience, because she finally learns how to walk in the way of Yahweh. God gives Israel an extra blessing and a double portion, which we will see as we compare the patriarchal covenants, the testimony, to the words of the prophets. And notice also in this that through it all, through all that Jacob went through, he would not let go of God. You find that this really becomes symbolic, a parable of Israel, because even though God has slaughtered Israel, even though God has taken her ancestors through horrific holocausts, you find that the people come to this place where they realize there's no other way but God. There's no other path that works other than following the values, the ethics, and the standards that are embedded within God's covenant. You also find this idea of a covenant of hope, and this is Genesis 46. Within Genesis, the context is that Jacob has just learned that Joseph is still alive, and he is leaving with his sons to go to Egypt, but he is full of fear. He has just received this wonderful news that his son is alive, but he is so afraid. His heart has been so broken that he does not dare believe. He does not dare hope that he will ever see his beloved son again. So what does God do? God gives him a promise that he will see his son again, the son whom he believed to be dead. He will not only see him, he will physically touch him. So, God also within this does establish a very definite time period for this to happen. What I did not cover in the patriarchal covenants, with this before the circumcision covenant, God had given Abraham and Sarah a very specific time period for which the promise of a son would be realized. They said, within a year you will have a child. That was actually a separate covenant. I do not mention that covenant in Yahweh Exists simply for the sake of brevity, because it was so long already. But that covenant is very important at this juncture of Israel's history, because what God does is he establishes a time period when Jacob realizes his son is alive, when he realizes that, he's going to see his son, there is a promise that you will see your son in your lifetime and you will physically touch him. For Abraham and Sarah, when they were given the promise of a son, they were given a specific time frame in which they would have that son. So you see some of these parallels within the covenants that God establishes with Abraham. I want to show you one place where Isaiah builds off of this concept. So this is going to be Isaiah 61. And I think this text is very important for many of us today because it is where we see, I think, a lot of us waking up and awakening to many of the concepts that God has left for us. So Isaiah 61, and this is something for the future, something that we will see fulfilled. It says, the Spirit of Jehovah is upon me, because Jehovah has anointed me to preach good tidings to the meek. He has sent me, and notice all the things that this person is going to do: to bind up the brokenhearted, to proclaim liberty to the captives, and the opening of the prison to them that are bound, to proclaim the acceptable year of Yahovah and the day of vengeance of our God, to comfort all that mourn, to appoint to them that mourn in Zion, to give them beauty for ashes, the oil of joy for mourning, and the garment of praise for the spirit of heaviness, that they may be called trees of righteousness, the planting of Yahovah, that he may be glorified. Notice number 4 here, to proclaim the acceptable year of Yahovah. What Isaiah is telling us is that at some point in time in the future, there will be a prophet who will tell us, who will give us some sort of time frame that we will know where to place our hope, that we will know when and where Yahovah's redemption, the return of his firstborn son, when that is going to take place. This is something, a future prophecy that has yet to be fulfilled. But we see all of those concepts established within the patriarchal covenants. Let's continue on. It says, and strangers shall stand and feed your flocks, and the sons of the alien shall be given your plowmen and your vine dressers. But you shall be named the priests of Yahweh. Men shall call you the ministers of our God, and you will eat the riches of the Gentiles in their glory, and you shall boast yourselves. For your shame you shall have double, and for the confusion they shall rejoice in their portion. Therefore in their land they shall possess the double, everlasting joy shall be given to them. So what you find in both this covenant of hope, as well as in the blessings given to Jacob, you find this idea of this double blessing, this double portion that is given to Jacob. And as we go through the testimony, you're going to see that many of the prophets build on this idea of a double latter-day blessing at the time of Israel's return. Now, this does conclude this portion, the review of chapter 3. I'm going to come back and get my mic here. So the concepts that are established within the patriarchal covenants are very important. They establish what God is going to build on within the testimony, with what he's going to give them as far as blessings and curses at Mount Sinai, and then later on in Deuteronomy. You find that in every single case, one covenant totally incorporates and builds on previous and prior covenants. And the same thing within the prophets. Prophets will build on the work of their predecessors, building and adding more detail to it, never changing, never once rescinding. Let me reiterate that because it is such an important point. One prophet can never rescind or annul the words of a previous prophet or contradict the words of a previous prophet or the law, because if he does, then there's no light in him. There's no truth, because he has spoken something that is out of line with what God has established. So these are concepts that we're going to build on as we go through the testimony. Now, next week, we will be getting into chapter 14. And I did update the reading schedule on the Yahweh Exists page on Facebook if you want to follow that. I did assign, listen to me, a sign like I'm a school teacher here. But I did put out suggested readings for this particular upcoming 2-week period so that we can be ready for the next class. We're going to get into the prophetic law of Leviticus 26 and see how that law of prophecy, is something that every prophet builds on, and to see the chronology play out in the words of Scripture. So it's going to be a lot of fun going through that. Now, we are going to take next week as a bye week, I believe, and then we will come back here in 2 weeks. So we are going to come back on the 14th. So at this point, I'm going to open it up for any questions or comments. I see that Crystal caught the fact that I am still living in the past. Thank you very much for that. I appreciate it. I will get back into the future as soon as the class is over. So any questions or comments? This is a lot of information, and I hope you guys will build on it. And if you don't see it, please question me, challenge me, because we do learn from discussions, and we learn from dialogue with each other. So I'm going to wait just a minute because there is quite a bit of a lag. I believe it's about a 30-second lag. And otherwise, we will see you tomorrow morning. I hope you guys will join us at United Israel here on YouTube for Ross's study on love this morning. Tomorrow morning at 10:30. It looks like it's going to be a wonderful study, and I'm looking forward to it. All right. Well, if there's no other questions or comments, I'm going to go ahead and stop the broadcast, and I wish you guys a safe and warm and healthy weekend, and I will see you back here. Shabbat Shalom.